Governor Jared Polis of Colorado, and I'm so excited to join you all virtually to highlight the role of geothermal energy in our clean, reliable energy future. Geothermal is an exciting opportunity for Colorado, the West, the entire nation to generate clean, low-cost electricity that helps us reach climate goals and saves people money. At the same time, it's a domestic energy resource that improves national security, creates good-paying jobs, and protects our businesses from the severe price swings and sky-high costs of natural gas. It can also be a critical tool to help balance out wind and solar to help electrify the grid. This past year, I chaired the Western Governors Association, where I launched the Heat Beneath Our Feet initiative, which examined opportunities for and helped figure out ways to take down barriers to the increased deployment of geothermal energy in all of the western states, including Texas. Geothermal can help Colorado, Texas, western states, the entire country, and the world meet our renewable energy and energy security goals. In our final report, the Heat Beneath Our Feet initiative made important recommendations for policymakers in states and the federal government on how we can increase the development and deployment of geothermal energy. In the past 2 years in Colorado, I've signed a number of bills to advance this exciting resource here. First, our newly renamed Energy and Carbon Management Commission, which used to be the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, now also has exclusive authority for permitting deep geothermal wells. The Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission also started to work to better understand Colorado's geothermal resources, how hot and where, how deep to go, how far you have to go to drill to get access to the heat, and better subsurface data will help grow development. Last year, I also signed legislation creating the Geothermal Energy Grant Program and refundable tax credits for geothermal energy, which is going to provide over $150 million to businesses, individuals, and communities to install geothermal heating and cooling in their homes and communities or for electricity production. In Colorado, we're also working to build the geothermal workforce to fill the good-paying jobs that come with the expansion of geothermal energy. As you know, many skills and positions needed for geothermal energy development are highly transferable from the oil and gas industry. There's much more to be done, and I'm excited to be on this journey with you all, working to rapidly accelerate the development and deployment of geothermal energy, and I can't wait to see you all in Colorado.
Wonderful, and a huge thank you to Colorado Governor Polis. His work on geothermal has been doing a lot in Colorado, as well as the rest of the West. My name is Stephen Emmen. I am the Energy Policy Advisor for Western Governors Association. If you're not familiar with WGA, we help represent 22 governors of the westernmost states and territories in the U.S., and we help to advocate and push forward Western priorities. As Governor Polis mentioned, during his tenure as chair of WGA, he led the Heat Beneath Our Feet initiative that explored the development and deployment of geothermal resources throughout the West. Throughout this panel discussion, just a warning, I will refer to it as HBOF. I couldn't be more grateful for the opportunity that Governor Polis's initiative gave our team. Shortly after engaging with the geothermal community, we quickly learned that the geothermal community is full of rich and diverse leaders. The attitude that I would attribute to this industry can be summed up in a quote that I saw from Project Interspace, and that is simply, "Houston, we have a solution." Throughout the initiative, WGA engaged with over 500 unique individuals through a series of workshops held by several governors throughout the West, a webinar series, the Out West podcast, as well as a public survey. The goal of all of this was to come out with a final report with recommendations on how to spur the expansion of geothermal resources throughout the West. You can find the final report on westgov.org. It would be impossible to cover all the recommendations in one simple panel. However, today we have joining us some of those individuals who contributed to the final report and policy recommendations that we had. We first have Paul Thomsen, Vice President of Business Development for Ormat Technologies. We have Johanna Ostrum, the Chief Operating Officer for Transitional Energy. We also have Bryce Carter, the Emerging Markets Project Manager for Geothermal at the Colorado Energy Office. And we also have Stu Levenbach, the Executive of Global Policy and Funding at Baker Hughes. Thank you guys very much for contributing to the final report. And to kick off our discussion today, I'm going to lead into Paul Thomsen. I've asked each panelist, I've asked each panelist to pick one of the recommendations out of the report and discuss how this has impacted their organization and also why it's important that we can find a solution moving forward to better the geothermal industry. And Paul, you selected the capacity for agencies to permit and lease for geothermal projects. Is that correct? And can you give us a little explanation about why that's important to Ormat and your experiences with that?
Happy to. And what an exciting title. Get up here and talk about permitting. But let me take a step back first and just say what an exciting time it is to be here at the GRC with Pivot, talking about geothermal. And it shouldn't be lost on anybody that for the Western Governors Association to be led by Governor Polis this year and focus on geothermal was just a massive sea change in the discussion for geothermal development in the Western United States. And for a state like Colorado that has such oil and gas expertise, but no geothermal development. You would expect a governor from Nevada or California or something to focus on this. But Governor Polis had a vision for this, and the timing couldn't be better. We're at the Geothermal Rising Conference. I think it's got the highest attendance of any year since the conference has been in play. And we've seen more contracts and power purchase agreements signed. More developers are here trying to figure out how to deploy new and innovative technologies. The discussion is so ripe, and we need the capacity to see a lot of this work to come to fruition. And that revolves around being able to simply drill geothermal wells in the ground. And that is a tall order today because most of the federal lands most of the lands in the West are federal, and we have to go through a permitting process called NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, to be able to drill. And unlike oil and gas, which has some, maybe better lobbyists and older provisions, it takes us about 2 years to get an exploration permit to drill a well. So for all of the excitement and what's going on, here and talking about new drilling techniques and so forth, we have to work for about 2 years, if everything goes well, to be able to drill those wells in the ground, deploy this new technology, and really see, take advantage of the heat beneath our feet. I will not say HBOF, can't do it. And so that's the discussion that I think this report really looks at of how do we start to streamline this. And I think the report had some great ideas, and I'll try to rattle off a few. The report breaks them out, but simply, how do we work with the federal agencies who have an expertise in oil and gas and start to convert that to geothermal is one of the ideas of taking the staff who says, look, guys, I'm on the fossil side of this equation. I don't do geothermal, and say, those days are over. Let's take your expertise. If we're seeing this transition from oil and gas, let's take those federal employees and start deploying them on renewable and geothermal technologies. Number two, we're missing a framework in some places, and because we're seeing so much more drilling, low temperature projects moving next to hot springs and water, we need to work in areas to create an expedited framework. One of the areas is water monitoring. BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, has become very interested in this. But every district office approaches it from a brand new, let's reinvent the wheel type perspective. And as an industry, we need to say, here is the best way to do that monitoring. And let's create a framework that can be similar and applied to all projects, whether they're in Colorado or Nevada or California in the West, to get these projects moving quicker. The last one I'll touch on, and I'll let my panel kind of chime in so we can have a discussion, is streamlining this process. We had a project recently in Nevada where we spent 2 years trying to get an exploration permit, and we received it. We got the coveted environmental assessment. And then we went to get a permit from the county, and they were heeing and hawing about the project. And meanwhile, a lithium company came in and staked the claim, and with 15 days notice could drill a core hole to determine if there was minerals on that site. If that doesn't, isn't the best example of something being broken. Mineral extraction, I can do in 15 days. Geothermal development, that's carbon-free, that's in desperate need of this administration, I can't get anywhere in less than 2 to 4 years. So that's a big part of the report. I'm incredibly proud that Governor Polis and the Western Governor's team really dug in on that. And I think we are going to start to see, because there are so many people here trying to drill and develop projects, a more robust discussion, and Congress taking action, local governments taking action. You heard about the new regulations in Colorado to try to expedite deeper drilling. It's an incredibly exciting time, and I'm just thrilled to be here. So thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. And I believe another recommendation that occurred in the report was actually possibly setting up a Center for Geothermal Excellence within the government, where there could be geothermal experts that a BLM office could work off of. Stu, do you have anything to say about that, and maybe how that might work with other agencies that could bounce ideas off of that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I think it's important when you think about capacity at the federal level that partly it can be addressed through additional resources, but also through better management. And so this is where the idea of a Center for Excellence comes into play, because having a technical support unit, whether it's in the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, whatever the land management agency is, having that unit based somewhere that can provide the district offices with the technical support they need can help to transfer that knowledge, and when there are questions regarding a permit application, help it move a little faster.
And I think that's a great idea, because one thing we did hear when we were talking to individuals about their experience was they would go and apply for a permit. There would be turnover in the BLM office, and the next person would come in and have to start all over on learning the project and trying to get up to speed with that. Johanna, I'll ask, has your company experienced any difficulties with getting permits at the federal level as well?
Yeah, I appreciate that. First, I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. Geothermal Rising has a really great energy this year. All the folks watching the Pivot panel online, you guys are really missing out. It's been a wonderful event, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this really important report that was put out by the Western Governors Association. Our company is headquartered in Colorado. Very proud that my governor led this initiative. Was really glad to participate and attend several workshops. It's just been really exciting to see a governor get excited about it in a place that traditionally doesn't have geothermal, in fact, doesn't have any at all. Our company, Transitional Energy, is headquartered in Denver, so I think we're all kind of in a foot race to see who can put the first electrons out there from geothermal project in Colorado. So exciting times. Yes, so regulatory hurdles are an interesting question for my company. So Transitional Energy is a company focused on co-production of geothermal energy from oil and gas wells. So we don't drill wells. We're not looking at pursuing projects where we drill deep wells. What we're looking at is working with oil and gas operators or acquiring oil and gas wells that have already been drilled that have thermal energy. They're accessing a resource that's already hot and can produce that to surface. It's generally lower temperature than what you would drill after, but you don't have the risk or the regulatory timing that it takes to bring that thermal energy to surface. So we are just starting down the path with the BLM on how do you permit a oil and gas site that already has a permit, been in existence for a very long time, but you are going to now produce geothermal energy from that location. This is something that really hasn't been done, and so we're kind of figuring out how to do that with our project out in Blackburn, Nevada. We received a $2.5 million grant from the Department of Energy to generate 1 megawatt of geothermal energy from existing oil field. So we have a pilot project out there right now that's not DOE funded, but we are producing electricity out there right now at much smaller scale. So the story is yet to be written on how we do this, but we're hoping that it'll be an easy opportunity to really generate geothermal energy from on existing site that doesn't have any new surface disturbance, and really think about appropriate use of current resources.
Absolutely. And Bryce, is the state going to start permitting some wells on state land? Are they going to step in and maybe take some of that business?
Yeah, I mean, Colorado is very busy right now. So I was very fortunate. My background is in community organizing, and I was hired with the creation of the Geothermal Energy Grant Program. And I'm approaching 1 year, and the last year has been a whirlwind of opportunity and really gearing up the industry. We've been able to pass legislation not only to streamline regulations and permitting process with the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, but also Department of Water Resources. We're collaborating together on the state side, figuring out how do we not only bring in stakeholder input, understand what type of projects are being looked at, and streamlining that process, but then how do we move forward with the resources. And so as you heard from Governor Polis earlier, we've passed tax credits, refundable tax credits that will support both as an investment tax credit at 30% for geothermal electricity production or generation. And then we even have a production tax credit at $3 a megawatt hour. In addition to that, we do have a flat rate tax credit looking at how do we support the heating and cooling sector of geothermal. So altogether, we are really highlighting the state as open for business, trying to figure out how do we streamline these processes, and also understanding that we're in a leadership opportunity. And so as we think about this report and the recommendations we're making, it's very, I understand that I'm in a position of privilege, and Colorado, you know, we talk a lot about Colorado as such the opportunity and exciting times, but we know that there's 49 other states and territories and more territories to be able to engage with. We're talking about tribal nations as well. So how can we be a partner? And I think that's an opportunity where we look to the federal side as we look at facilitating and elevating best practices, and how do we be able to engage this emerging market, knowing that the impacts are going to lift all boats. And so we're really excited. Certainly we are starting from 0 kilowatts, but with the resources that we have, we're excited to be able to accelerate adoption, understanding that we have ambitious goals. Colorado, we plan to be at 80% renewable electricity by 2030, and by 2040, 100% electricity, renewable electricity. By 2050, our goal is to decarbonize our entire economy. So, you know, I know one of the reports I saw is we have over 33,000 miles of gas distribution pipelines. So those need to be decarbonized somehow between now and 2050. What does that look like? What does that mean for workforce transition? And again, you know, the story is going to play out in many different ways. So understanding that on the state level, we're the gateway to local communities. How can we facilitate those relationships so that we're facilitating transformational relationships versus transactional, to really understand what's the local context, what are the cultural implications, and being able to be a partner as we look at the broader context of this emerging market. So that way we, the public understands not only the opportunities of resiliency and engagement that geothermal can bring, and also understand, you know, there is some risk. Maybe there are wells that are going to go dry, but being able to make sure folks are understanding what that opportunity is, and again, what that story is for each of their local communities.
That's great to hear. And before we move on to next recommendations, I do want to mention that I am aware that there's an interagency working group amongst a couple different agencies to look at permitting reform and what they can do to make it a better process. So absolutely, I see some allies in the BLM as well as DOE on this front, but capacity definitely when we're speaking about Congress. I know that the budget for, let's say, the GTO office has oftentimes been underfunded for people to look at these types of issues, as well as in the BLM. So Paul, thank you very much for touching on this topic and bringing this recommendation forward. We were going to move next to Johanna, and you wanted to discuss workforce development as well as demonstration projects. And I'm going to be remiss if I don't mention that you and I came from the same oil and gas company, albeit we worked there at different times. But I think that's very telling of the transition opportunity that is available here in the geothermal community, and as well as how we can develop some of the existing workforce to easily transfer over to geothermal. What else could we be doing to develop the workforce for what the geothermal community needs?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we were ships passing in the night at that company. So yes, there's a you think the oil and gas industry is pretty small and tight-knit. The geothermal industry is even smaller. It's been great to run into familiar faces and see folks that I've worked with in the past. And the theme being that I was an engineer in the oil and gas space for a little under 2 decades. And in 2020, the company I was working for filed for bankruptcy. And I took a hard look at what do I want to do with my career, what skills do I have that are transferable, and met with an old friend that I'd worked with at my first job, very smart PhD geologist, and he had this idea of, hey, can we take thermal energy or take a waste stream from oil and gas and make some profit off of it? And I'd always loved geothermal, and I thought, this is a really neat solution to solve this problem. So everybody that works at Transitional Energy came from the oil and gas space. We've worked with each other over the past however many decades we all have experience. So, and we see a lot of interest. I have a lot of colleagues who reach out and say, hey, if you guys ever need any help, let me know. So geothermal is an exciting place for oil and gas folks that want to look at a job in the energy transition, and they have a lot of skills that geothermal industry needs. And so I'm excited about that idea, also because I have friends in that industry, and it's hard to be in an industry that has such massive cyclic job losses, frankly. And so geothermal utilities always need electricity. There are definitely surges and slumps in the geothermal industry, but it's nothing compared to oil and gas from my experience. So I'm excited about that, but that's all, energy development, electricity development. I think there's a real jobs stretch that's happening in the shallow geothermal world. There's not a lot of folks that have the expertise to drill those shallow wells to create thermal networks and things like that. So I'm definitely not an expert in that, but I've heard a steady theme of that. There's not enough folks working in that part of the world. But I'm excited about the industry growing. I spoke earlier about with some folks about how important it is that as we hire other industries into geothermals, that we think about the diversity of who we're hiring and really think about how to bring fresh ideas to the table.
I think that's a great point. And Paul, when it comes to Ormat's operations, you guys are very similar, maybe not the oil and gas industry directly, but you guys, power plant operators, you guys do hire a lot of power plant operators, and it's very transferable. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, maybe. Look, workforce development has unlimited potential when it comes to geothermal development, and you see it here in this conference, whether we're talking heat pumps, large-scale electricity generation, pump manufacturing, electrical know-how to interconnect the facilities, designing and manufacturing the power plants. Well, Ormat is a vertically integrated company, so we design and manufacture the equipment, we own and operate the power plants. Today we design and own and operate the transmission and interconnection system, we build the power plants. We have a profound impact on the workforce development and have done things through time. And I think a lot of this conference is kind of revisiting this excitement around, look, we're trying to transition people from the oil and gas industry to help with drilling, but we're also trying to transition everyone else to come to this sector and be a proactive player. Ormat, probably 10 years ago, we couldn't find power plant operators. So we worked with our local community college to create a power plant operators course, to put a voltmeter in someone's hand and say, here are the things we can do. And so when you start to see that reflected in the people coming out of not only our community college system, but the University of Nevada, Reno, we're here in beautiful Reno, Nevada right now, unfortunately inside and not outside, but the National Geothermal Academy was founded and operates out of the University of Nevada, Reno, training the next group of reservoir engineers and so forth. And we have experts here from Stanford and other places. So it's an incredible opportunity for workforce development, to develop these projects. Each one of our geothermal projects, probably takes between 2,000 to 3,000 people that touch that project in some way during its development. So, local governments and county commissioners love these projects because they see this huge influx of, economic development, But then when the power plants are up and operating, they don't see a huge burden left behind by, we're not a Walmart where you have to deal with so many people and build new schools and roads and infrastructure and things. So it's one of the incredible positive stories around geothermal. And, we have a booth here at this conference, and it's amazing the amount of people who are coming and asking about jobs, whether it's an accounting job or a, resource development job. The needs are, really huge, and it's exciting to see the other universities. I attended a workshop, I think brought on by Western governors in Colorado, called the Collaboratory between the University of Colorado, Colorado State, and NREL, looking at this very question. And those conversations are just phenomenal and are really a testament to the work that Governor Polis put into this to say, what are these needs? How do we identify them? And how do we, put people to work in a growing carbon-free capacity, future in geothermal? And that's just an incredibly exciting time and initiative that came out of the Western Governors Report.
And Stu, do you have a similar experience as Paul?
Well, I think but I would also say that I want to talk a little more about sustainability in the oil and gas sector, in that even within a company like Baker Hughes, there is tremendous interest in our sustainability program within the company and working on these types of projects. So in addition to just appealing to the workforce outside the company, within the company, there's, I think, a keen interest in working on these types of projects as well.
Absolutely. And Johanna, the next topic you want to talk about is expanding funding for demonstration projects. I know your company has done some of these federal funded projects, but can you tell us a little bit more about your experience there and why that's important to the future of geothermal and what we're going to achieve with those projects?
Yes, of course. So we're a small company, as I mentioned, startup founded in 2020. One of the key things you've got to prove as a startup that your idea works, first of all. Second of all, it's economic, and then that you can sell it repeatedly, right? And the very first hurdle that you got to get across is testing your technology. And sometimes technology is very cheap. If you're writing software, you can test that, send it out to your users, they beta test it, and you get a lot of information back quickly. Geothermal is not a low capital testing type of business model. Generally, whatever you're doing, it takes significant capital to test it. We're on the lower end because we don't have to drill wells, but there's still testing that needs to happen. And so there's a lot of folks with really great ideas. Some of them won't be great, but you won't figure that out until they're able to test it. So I think the DOE has already positioned itself and has historically as a place where they'll give out funding for companies with good ideas to test things, give them that kind of early stage, non-dilutive equity or capital to test projects. Luckily for our company, we received a grant from the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade. That was to do some studies in Colorado and then to eventually deploy equipment in Colorado. Our first pilot project happened to be in Nevada because we got an oil and gas company there that was interested in piloting our equipment, and we were able to raise a friends and family round to fund that equipment. But that was difficult. It's not easy. Fundraising is never easy, but if there's a lot of grant opportunities out there. It's really transformational. And this morning I heard someone talk about failing fast. Well, you don't want to fail fast, but you want to learn quickly so you can improve. And that's the best way to figure out what works and what doesn't and quickly move on and then really innovate within the industry.
If I can follow up on that, Ormat is no longer a startup company, but we were, and every company was. And there were two programs that we talked a lot about at the Western Governors, and one was a cost share drilling program. The Department of Energy in the 80s had a cost share drilling program where they bore the risk. They gave developers like Ormat money to say, go drill and try to find this geothermal resource, and if you are successful, pay us back that money, and we're going to go look for other people to do it. And if you're unsuccessful, we'll reduce that burden by 50% in this program. And that changed the world for geothermal and for Ormat because we were able to use that cost share drilling program. We drilled additional wells in the Imperial Valley. We developed the geothermal project. We proved that the never before heard of or questioned binary technology could work, and the rest is history. Today we're a $5 billion market cap company. So programs like that, really we should take a look at. The government isn't known for acting quickly or nimbly or failing fast, but those are programs that I think can have a profound effect and reuse the money. The second part is the DOE loan program needs to also be more nimble. Ormat took out a DOE loan program, I'm going to try to do the math, like 15 years ago under the Obama administration for developing renewable energy projects. And this was a loan guarantee. Ormat went to the market and got money. It was backstopped by a loan guarantee. The projects were hugely successful throughout Nevada. And we are trying to give that loan guarantee lending capacity back to DOE. But they have a prepayment penalty. For us to do that, we will have to pay gobs more money to allow them to find other developers like those sitting on the stage or throughout this exhibit hall to use that money for future projects. And that is ridiculous. And we've talked about this, testified in front of Congress and so forth, but that's a good example of that program needs to be recycling this money, fail fast or be successful quick, but let's keep, it's absurd that Ormat is sitting here on I think it's a $150 million loan guarantee that we could have paid back, but we don't want to because the prepayment penalty is so steep that could go to another developer, another project, move quickly, and see that innovation coming out of those programs. A lot of this stuff that you're hearing about today or being discussed at this conference has also been around. The Center of Excellence for Permitting, for example. We have someone here from BLM who, that program existed in previous administrations. Let's do it again. And now with kind of this new interest, let's do it better and take those lessons learned. For the DOE funding, it's great we're focusing on, above surface technology, but if you've heard me talk once, you've heard me 100 times say, the secret to this industry is what's below the surface. We're very good. Everyone in the world and in the industry is good at making turbines and spending money and seeing the capital come back on drill bit improvements and so forth. The real magic and the money is in the subsurface and finding new reservoirs or looking at non-hydrothermal reservoirs where there may not be heat or permeability and drilling faster, cheaper, and deeper. And if the DOE can help us do that, it's an absolute game changer for the geothermal industry moving forward.
Do we have time for me to say something on demonstration projects?
Absolutely.
Okay, so one thing that's really important to understand is that there's all this money that the government has made available in the form of demonstration projects. But one of the challenges is that those funds are addressing multiple societal goals, and there are all these terms and conditions that are attached to the funding. And so terms and conditions in terms of how intellectual property is handled if it's generated under that grant. Terms and conditions on, for example, domestic content like Build America, Buy America. And so because of the multiple goals, it does make it difficult for companies to participate. And we're not, many companies have come together and are forming consortia with universities and nonprofits and enthusiastically applying for these funds. But there's going to come a time when the DOE is going to have to make some decisions on waivers because some of these terms are going to be challenging for some of the companies that are participating. And we're going to get to that point when there's going to be a lot of discussion on the waivers and whether they're issued or not. And that's one of the things to keep in mind with the demonstration projects is that these other goals that the government's trying to address could potentially create cost currents in terms of having successful demonstration projects.
That's a great point. And to Paul's point about capacity with permitting and leasing, the same thing applies to these grant programs, is that agencies need to have the capacity, as well as if a state government's applying for it, their counterpart there needs to have the capacity as well. So something else to consider when these demonstration projects go out. Johanna, thank you very much for those recommendations. And I'll move on to Bryce. And Bryce, you wanted to talk about coordinating efforts with state governments, but also community and tribal engagement. On the first topic in the recommendation there, obviously, as representing governors and from state government, we know that the state government has the best experts, is always right, and is the boots on the ground doing a lot of the work out there. Can you talk to us about the importance when for instance, USGS is doing the Earth MRI, or they're doing a play fairway analysis of geothermal resources? How important is it for the USGS to engage with you and talk about the resources, where they should start, and engage other state agencies as well?
Yeah, I think when you're talking about those resources and mapping and understanding how can you, what is the potential and what is the value of that, it really is important to lay out that data and collaborate, because I think, as I mentioned earlier, context matters. So it's understanding not only where, in fact, at our Colorado rig just the other week, we had the Geological Survey come by and show us probably about 20 different maps that they've evolved with over the last several decades. And they even identified, oh yeah, there's this thing from this map from 15 years ago that we don't understand where the context is today. And so being able to apply that and standardize that data and coordinate across agencies, so that making sure that we're all looking at the same thing, not only for us as we think about permitting, whether it's on the state side, but also the federal side. Are we singing to the same tune of what these resources are, what the potential is, and then allocating resources to confirm those resources? So certainly in Colorado, that's a big challenge for us, is being able to map out what are those opportunities, not only for the USGS and understanding the thermal gradients and other aspects, but also what's the overlay as we look at thermal capacity or electricity capacity. I'm even meeting with folks at this conference, finding out that there's hot springs with 150-degree Fahrenheit water just in their backyards in Southwest Colorado. So that's something that I'm not even sure if we have on the maps. So being able to understand that context and then coordinate that not only certainly internally within our state regulatory agencies, but then with the federal government, is going to further allow us to streamline how we can get money out the door and permitted projects and actually make these things happen.
I think there's also a lot of opportunity with not only through Western governors, but also the other regional groups. I served as the energy advisor to Governor Sandoval in Nevada, and there's groups, it's like alphabet soup, so bear with me, but it's like the Western Interstate Energy Board, and NARUC, the National Association of Rural Utility Commissioners, and the list goes on and on and on, that all affect energy, and they all sit in rooms talking about energy development and their fossil fuel plants and retiring these things. And the conversation is starting to change to bring in renewables and renewable development. And the more that all of those regional groups, whether it's Western governors, whether it's NARUC or the national, you name it in the West, we're going to see huge improvements in sharing this information. The lessons learned from the 600 megawatts of geothermal operating in Nevada can be, deployed to Colorado. The lessons learned of, California likes to make the difficult impossible. I stole that quote from a friend of mine named Jonathan Weisgall. We all need to take those lessons learned to not do it like that, so we can be quicker. And one of the exciting things when I was just in Colorado with Governor Polis was, Colorado has such great examples of how they've promoted an oil and gas industry and deployed it very quickly and don't have the, all the public lands issues and are very familiar with this process. The geothermal groups, haven't had those conversations coming the other way. And so seeing that happen and having regulators from Colorado who have done this oil and gas 1,000 times coming to Nevada could be hugely helpful. And that dialogue, just is going to move mountains when it comes to the future development here of all geothermal projects, whether it's district, let's go to, Boise, Idaho. The capital is, all geothermally heated from district use. Same application, how can we look at other places? And, the convening of this geothermal conference is a great place for that. And those conversations through the Western Governor's Report are just hugely important. And it's just amazing to see them happening at more higher frequency and with more, divergent groups.
And I'll build off of that of, we have some of the most advanced oil and gas regulations in the country. A lot of lessons have been learned. Our Energy and Carbon Management Commission is looking at those lessons, applying them streamlining to the industry, working with partners. And as part of that is also an element of local control. So counties and municipalities looking at what can they permit for wells and what does that look like, which means stakeholdering is going to be so vital to build up those relationships. And so much of the challenge of the industry is the potential is enormous of what we can do, but the capacity on the ground is very limited. So how do we provide those connections to engage? As certainly our office, looking at my own capacity, but then other states, and then the utilities. A lot of these, especially rural electric utilities, they're very limited. They might only have 1 or 2 people that are even thinking geothermal, if at that. And so how do you provide those mechanisms of engagement, bringing them into the wider networks, and understanding what pathways they have to embrace the technology?
You know, it's also super exciting because I can't tell you how many county commissioners I've talked to who, we have these incentives in Nevada, and they go, you know, the geothermal energy's here, and you can't develop it anywhere else, and why should we be giving you tax incentives and this and that? And boy, what a paradigm shift that now, no, this isn't the only geothermal place. We actually don't, you know, we may not need water or permeability. We can look at heat everywhere else. And, oh, by the way, that county commissioner over there wants to give you a run for your money to try to develop these projects. And when we talk about the scaling possibility or seeing, you know, huge growth in geothermal, it's going to take that competitive nature that you were just discussing to say, come do it here. We're going to help you streamline it. You know, it's not, you know, some, you know, unicorn that only exists in a few places. And the more we do that, this conversation is just, it's so exciting. And, you know, at Ormat, we have not been seriously looking at development in Colorado, and now we're saying they're, you know, look, the governor has said, you know, we're open for business. You've got the most advanced regs for drilling. Hello, you've got, you know, the largest developer in the United States' attention to go there, and if somebody wants to, you know, give us a hard time in a county in Nevada who's had geothermal for 50 years and they thought, you know, we don't have to do anything about it, what a game changer that is.
Absolutely, and to help gear up for what's coming, we're certainly saying we're open for business, but we also want to make sure we're engaging those local communities on the regional level. So, you know, we have been invited to numerous regions of the state to hold dialogue, to educate and inform people what the resources are, what that potential is. And it's also at those dialogues I'm hearing, you know, what is the vision of what technology can provide. I know one utility, their worst case nightmare is pretty close to reality. It's that Friday night during ski season when you have 1,000 electric vehicles coming in, they're plugging in, everyone has their electric heat because we're electrifying our economy, and you're on a radial of a power line. So what are you going to do? And having that geothermal technology where not only are you producing electricity right there on site, but then you have the heating capacity. I mean, it's not just ski towns, but especially rural communities and even urban corridors all across Colorado are very excited about what's ahead.
You had the comment earlier, you know, I'd say we have a solution for that. We have a great example of we just brought online this year a project called Caso Diablo 4, which is a state-of-the-art closed-loop geothermal power plant at the foot of Mammoth Ski Resort. And they're thrilled. And you can ski down the run and look right at our geothermal facility. And they are starting to market that and love that. And you know, it's as a skier, I love the fact that a lot of our geothermal resources are near incredible ski mountains where the geology has pushed that geothermal fluid up to the surface. So it's about time, Colorado.
I don't know. I thought Puna Geothermal out in Hawaii was pretty nice, Paul.
That works too.
But I think that you guys almost naturally went into the next recommendation that Bryce had chosen, and that was engagement with community and tribal communities. And I know when we were out in Hawaii, the one thing that we heard was early and often, because when we talked to the native Hawaiians, they said, we want these projects, we understand what's at stake, we want clean energy, but we also have important things to contribute here. And Bryce, I think that also coordinating with state governments, they understand those local, regional communities and tribes and how to engage with them. Can you tell us a little bit about how Colorado is working with that structure and framework?
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, again, like I said earlier, it's about building transformational relationships. It's not just about saying, I have money, let me give it to you. It's about showing up in the community and actually listening. What are the needs? What are the concerns? How can we design a program that's going to meet the need of the community? And so it takes time and patience and a lot of legwork and a lot of capacity to do that. And so it is working with partners, whether it's community-based organizations, certainly tribes, and other communities that are really struggling, again, with capacity or otherwise. How do you show up? How do you listen and understand what those needs are? So as part of that, we're looking at potentially a mini grant program to figure out how do we make meetings that are already looking at being held, how do you make them more accessible? Thinking about different times of the day, thinking about Spanish or language translation services, childcare services. How do you make sure that as we have these dialogues, everyone in the community can be part of them to give us the information we need to better inform our programming and streamlining the resources that can come out. And often our office, the Colorado Energy Office, we are the gateway to just the beginning of the understanding of what federal resources there are. And so having that network of understanding across, whether it's USGS or if we're looking at the Geothermal Technology Office, how can we be that partner that really provides that messaging, communication, and understanding on the local level? But to be clear, it's not us jumping into community and saying, hey, we're here to save the day of geothermal. It's really listening about, like I said, with the ski town, what are your challenges? What are your fears? How can geothermal potentially be a solution, and offer that as an opportunity for them to explore and pursue?
Look, your recommendation has already been put into use. There was a phenomenal workshop here at the Geothermal Rising Conference on communication and engaging with those communities, and it is critical. And I think the difference for geothermal than a lot of other places is that when we are successful, we are going to be in that community operating that power plant for the next 20 or 40 years. So if you think about that kind of, it's not an extractive exercise where we want to come get something and then we may leave. If we do it well, we're going to be there and be a part of that community for a very, very long time. So to start that conversation early, often meet with those groups and continue to do that is just absolutely critical for the project development. And you've got to have those discussions because we're going to be neighbors, or we're going to be, it's like a relationship, for better or for worse, for a very long period of time. And it has really served Ormat well, where we've engaged and built schools for folks, and it all kind of comes back together when we talk about workforce development. In Kenya, for example, we couldn't find really the right workforce for our power plant, so we created a school program for the women in Kenya who now are working and running our power plants. And talk about a nice full circle kind of exercise there. In New Zealand with the Maori people who have rights to the land there, we've built the kind of same relationship, and deploying a lot of the recommendations in the Western Governor's Report lead to incredibly successful projects for a very long period of time. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about geothermal is that it is, it's creating a sustainable long-term relationship in so many aspects moving forward.
And Paul, I think you get into a great point. And before we move into our last recommendation, if you're online, make sure to enter your questions. We'll head into a Q&A after this recommendation. But Stu, I believe you wanted to talk about the conversion of oil and gas wells. And something that we noted in the report is that under the IRA, there's a tax incentive to operate in what's known as energy communities. These are communities that have historically worked with fossil fuels. But there's a lot of benefit to that because also the geology has been explored. There's a lot known about that basin. And there's also a workforce there. Could you talk a little bit more about how we can convert oil and gas wells to produce geothermal energy or direct use applications?
Sure, be happy to. And I should do a quick round of thanks too, just to Project Interspace, Pivot 2023, Geothermal Rising, and Governor Polis and Steve, you and your staff, because Heat Beneath Our Feet it's a great report. It's very readable. There are a number of recommendations we're very excited about at Baker Hughes. And so it's been a pleasure working with you so far, and hopefully we can take and put some of these ideas into public policy in the coming months and years. So just so you know, Baker Hughes, it's a combination of a couple of companies that are over 100 years old. The namesake goes back to Reuben Baker, and before Howard Hughes was hanging out in hotel rooms, they were innovating, okay? They had a passion for innovation and extracting as much energy as possible out of rock. And that passion is still as applicable today when we think about geothermal energy. And so at Baker Hughes, we've drilled about 1,800 geothermal wells in 25 countries around the world. And the first wells we started drilling were about 40 years ago. Now, 40 years is an important number because if you look back to US public policy, about 40 years ago is when some of the primary statutes were passed to support geothermal policy. And so, let's see, pardon me because I wrote these down, I wasn't going to remember them all. So the California Geothermal Resources Act in 1967, the Federal Geothermal Steam Act in 1970 with modifications through the 80s, the Geothermal Loan Guarantee Program in 1975, and I think we already mentioned the User Coupled Confirmation Drilling Program in 1980. I mean, these statutes are really important. They contributed to about half of the current geothermal capacity in the U.S. So about half the geothermal capacity in the U.S. was created during the 1980s in the wake of these statutes. And so it's important to go back to them and see what ideas are still good for today, are still appropriate for today, and we have new technologies today that might need different types of policies. And so this is, I think the report's really important. I want to talk a little about the conversion of oil and gas wells to geothermal power, because we talk about a just transition as part of the energy transition, and in this case, energy communities. And so, not a Western city, but half my family's from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is an excellent example of a city that has gone through a transition related to energy. It lost half its population during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. About 500,000 people left Pittsburgh because of the loss of the coal production and the steel manufacturing capability. But if when I was going to family events in Pittsburgh during that time, the only thing going for the city was a football team, okay? And if you go to Pittsburgh now, because of all the hydraulic fracturing, oil and gas production in Western Pennsylvania, it's an amazing city, and the comeback has been incredible. But that is an example. I mean, we could have many, many Pittsburghs, large and small, as the energy transition continues and the potential disruption to energy communities. You have people that build lives there, they've accumulated skills there as part of their careers, and not every technology can leverage that. But if we can come up with ways to, such for example, convert oil and gas wells that are unproductive oil and gas wells and convert them into producing geothermal wells, that's an excellent technology that we should lean into and look for policies that can support that. Okay, and so for example, at Baker Hughes, we have a project, it's a consortium called Wells to Watts. We have a number of other partners in this. Continental is one, Chesapeake is another, Valuric, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch, but the point is that we are at the Baker Hughes Energy Innovation Center right now. We are testing this capability. It's a closed loop system using a green fire energy technology, and we're going to be looking to do a demonstration project in the near future. This is the type of technology that from a public policy perspective we want to support, because it is going to help communities that have this energy infrastructure and they want to repurpose it. So in any event, I think I appreciate the opportunity to highlight that in the report, and thanks for letting me share a few thoughts about it.
Absolutely. And Johanna, we talked about this on the Out West podcast a little bit, and I can't help but notice that I think you might be the only engineer up here. Could you explain a little bit about the difficulty about that? Because I understand that the borehole for an oil and gas well versus a geothermal well is very different, and maybe some of the challenges that just first pop to mind.
Yeah, I guess I got the nerd cred up here. Might as well leverage it, huh? So surprisingly, oil and gas wells are not that dissimilar to geothermal wells. Sometimes they're a little bit smaller in diameter, I would say. And the other big thing is they're not drilled as deep. Those are the really two big different things there. So yeah, you have some interesting challenges with oil and gas wells. Frequently, they've been drilled quite some time ago. The best wells, oil and gas wells for geothermal production, generally have a lot of water that they're producing. And that means they're probably not producing a lot of oil or gas, which means the oil and gas operator was not particularly motivated to keep those wells running efficiently, having good integrity and casing, because they weren't making a lot of money off of it, so they didn't really take care of it quite as much as these other newer wells that were producing a lot. So frequently with oil and gas wells, especially older ones, you can have integrity issues. So you might have holes in the casing or other potential issues. So the other great thing about it is all that data is public on state websites. So you can look up, what did the logs look like when they drilled it? Who drilled it? How deep did it go? What was the bottom hole temperature? What's been the production every month since it's been turned on? So there's this wealth of information available that I think the geothermal industry would love to see to help them develop. It's one of the great things, if you can leverage that oil and gas information, it's really valuable. So you'll find out if they failed an integrity test or had those sorts of issues. But if you've got a good engineer on staff, they can usually take a look at the wellbore diagrams and figure out whether you're going to have an issue or not, or you can always do some wellbore testing and figure that out.
Absolutely, and I think I'll just add to that recommendation as these energy community incentives as well as other tax incentives come out, obviously just ask that the administration makes sure that the definition within the rulemaking is very clear, there's no gray areas, and that it really benefits these energy communities. I'll go now to the audience if there's any questions here or if we received any online. If not, I do have some questions I have saved myself. Do we have any questions in the audience? Eric? Yeah, oh, I'm supposed to pretend I don't know you, right?
Especially since the cities are very high-density energy districts. So I'm really kind of curious, you talked about what Colorado's doing. Are you really strongly engaging the cities, the towns, and maybe even something about even more broadly the Western governors and how they're having that interaction with the cities?
So the question was for Bryce, and it was, how is the state of Colorado engaging cities and towns to promote geothermal, and what are you guys currently doing on that? And I will mention there was a theme throughout HBOF that there generally needs to be better education to the broad public about what geothermal is and what it's not. So Bryce?
Yeah, I think one of the first things we did is we streamlined definitions. So we passed legislation, it was House Bill 23-1252, that helped define thermal energy networks, and that's based off of the work from New England, New York, and a lot of folks that have been working in the industry trying to figure out how do we streamline definitions as we look at geo-exchange systems and the services they can provide. So it's a brand new world for a lot of folks. Folks don't know that we have one of the largest, I think it's like number 7, thermal systems in the country, geothermal systems in Pagosa Springs. And so they've been around since I think about 40 years ago, and they took advantage of those incentives. So for us, it is about communicating out what that opportunity is. It provides the green light for gas utilities to provide thermal services. And the reality is, I know of communities that say, we're ready, we want to go ahead and do business parks, we want to go ahead and do affordable housing, like let's make this happen. And in some cases are reaching out to some of their providers, and they're not sure where to start. So I think it's going to take a lot of facilitation of conversations, education, but really demonstration of projects. And in Colorado, many folks are aware of Colorado Mesa University. They're on their way to becoming 100% thermal energy network, being able to exchange that heat using heat pumps throughout their campus. There's conversations about interconnecting that with the broader community as well. In downtown Denver, they have a system that does waste heat recovery from the sewer line, and so they're able to power or heat about, I think, 90% of their needs. And certainly as we look at systems like Denver has a downtown steam system and other communities throughout Colorado, those are part of the conversations. You have aging infrastructure, and what's going to come next? The efficiencies of these systems are staggering. I know Xcel Energy just recently came out with a report about Colorado Mesa University, and at peak during the year, we're seeing a coefficient of 8. So that's a new report that just came out, and it's the implications are huge when you think about what this means, and it's just telling those stories. Another case study out of near Steamboat Springs, there's a community called Brown Ranch, and it's going to be about 1,200 homes, and they did an analysis to show between electrification with air source heat pumps and then ground source heat pumps, they anticipate about $100 million of savings over 30 years for those families, and that is in an energy community. So they can anticipate potentially as much as a 50% investment tax credit, which, by the way, wasn't calculated when they got the $100 million number. So, so that's my long-winded way of saying that it's certainly a big priority for us in Colorado, telling those stories and engaging community stakeholders. And that's one of the reasons why we're engaging with local community organizations to show up in the communities, learn about those needs, and figure out how do we deploy this technology. And certainly there's going to be many more conversations at our Public Utilities Commission and elsewhere as we figure it all out.
And I think another aspect, and I think you touched on it briefly, but also communicating not just to the public, but to the utilities about how to calculate this into resource assessment, because oftentimes they don't realize that this could be a clean, dispatchable resource. And so a lot of about how we communicate and educate is really important here.
And just one thing, I heard this recently too, is that for every 400 homes that install geothermal, you can expect about a megawatt of peak capacity reduction. And so when you're talking to utilities, especially any constrained utilities, I mean, that's music to their ears.
Wonderful. And we have about 3 minutes left. If there's one more question in the audience or if there's online questions, if not, I'll move into final remarks from our panelists. I do not see a question, so at this point in time, Paul, next steps for moving the geothermal industry forward. Obviously we talked about a couple of them here today. Are there any more you'd like to add on to that?
No, I'll just, our big push is going to be, trying to implement the suggestions in the Heat Beneath Our Feet report on permitting and that capacity. Again, we want to see as many wells going into the ground for geothermal development of all types. And that is what is going to, make this industry incredibly successful, bring down those costs, and see deployment in places we haven't looked at before. And there's so much exciting conversation about new techniques and so forth in this conference that we're in. But to put those into action, we need to be able to drill these wells very efficiently. And I think there's just huge room to improve upon that. So I think my goal is that next year we are here talking about how many core holes, how many exploration wells were drilled, how many new EGS wells were drilled, and how the government, took some very basic steps to help, treat geothermal like mineral extraction or oil and gas, give those same incentives, and really prioritize the development of this incredible resource. It's in California, they passed this interim order because they said, we need resources that provide capacity, are weather invariant, and produce electricity. And that's geothermal. And there are so few resources that can do that. And so I think, this is, I'll reiterate that I couldn't be more excited that now is the time. And I think, that will be the project for us and the Western Governors and Pivot and, Geothermal Rising Conference and Project Interspace is to get those projects into the ground.
Johanna, any last remarks?
Yeah, I always do this thing with my kids at the end of the day where we say, what was our happy part and what was our sad part? Or what was your rose and what was your thorn? So I'll take that and use that. So the thing I'm most excited about the geothermal industry is I talk to smart people every day that are very motivated to figure out really complex problems. And I'm really excited about the brain power and the enthusiasm. So I think innovation is happening. It's going to continue to happen, and I think we're going to solve some really complex problems and do some really great things. I would say the thing that sometimes gets me a little concerned, or what I think about, is really the concept of community engagement. So you can have the best project in the world, but if you walk in and just tell them, hey, this is where it's going to be next to this school, and this is probably some things I experienced from my oil and gas career, but if you don't engage with the community and work with them and have them a partner along with you, your project's not ever going to get off the ground. And it has a massive impact. And there's a lot of folks entering this space and developing in places that have never seen this before. And there's an education piece, and there's just being a good neighbor piece that I really hope we figure out and do well.
Absolutely. Bryce, any last remarks?
I certainly will echo that. I think that community engagement piece is so critical. And so for us, we're going to be opening up our grant program in 6 weeks. So we're really excited about that. And that's our opportunity to engage communities, let them know about this opportunity, and hopefully have some of those dialogues as projects begin to come to fruition. And then as we go into next year, hopefully around April, we'll begin to move forward with our merit-based refundable tax credit for electricity projects. So really trying to get projects moving, and Colorado, we're just excited to lead and help be a partner across the country and world as we figure this out.
Stu?
It's easy to be pessimistic when you look at the state of our politics in Washington, D.C. and living there. I mean, I think it's, probably that it's accurate. But what's important to keep, so you think about how are you going to get all these ideas in the Heat Beneath Our Feet report into public policy. And what's important to keep in mind is that this isn't just any organization, it's the Western Governors Association. It is a bipartisan effort here. And for that reason, it's an excellent blueprint. If you're looking for the types of ideas that can make it through a political process, the ideas that are in the report are a good place to start. So I mean, I'm looking forward to working with Geothermal Rising, with everybody here on trying to take these ideas and now develop them into things that can move through our political system, and appreciate the opportunity again.
Absolutely. Can we get a round of applause for the panelists up here? Now, it would be impossible to go through every single recommendation in the report, so if you have not seen it yet, you can go to westgov.org to read the entire report. And in conjunction with this panel, we also released another episode of the Out West podcast, where you can find at the same website, dedicated to the Heat Beneath Our Feet initiative. You'll hear from other experts, and as well as Paul on that episode of the podcast. But other experts such as Dr. Moore, Amanda Kolker, and many more who helped us on this initiative. I'd like to once again thank Pivot 2023, as well as Geothermal Rising. Thank you very much to everybody who set up this conference. But also, once again, huge thanks to Governor Polis for his leadership on this initiative. We would not be here without him. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.